And so she has two fundamental inalienable natural rights. One, like I said, the right to earn an honest living. And two, the right to use her own backyard in a peaceful and productive and benign manner. So as long as she's not harming anyone else, she should be allowed to do it. And the government can't tell her no for no good reason.
This is Monica Perez, and here with me today is Sam MacRoberts, the General Counsel and Litigation Director for the Kansas Justice Institute. He has litigated in state and federal courts since 2006. He sued governments who overstep their bounds in matters involving free speech and unlawful intrusions. And he has defended countless people against the government, fought to protect the rights of citizens in the hopes that they can remain free to pursue the lives that they wish. Thank you so much for sharing your valuable time with us today. Mr. MacRoberts, Sam?
Yeah, please do not call me Mr. MacRoberts. Sam is perfect.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. So I wanted to just hear a little bit about what you do in your capacity with the Kansas Justice Institute. Is it totally a voluntary thing? What drives you personally? What's your organization's mission? Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and that organization?
Kansas Justice Institute is a free law firm, and our entire mission is to push back against government overreach. And this is my full-time job. This is what I wake up doing. I tell people, and I mean it, that I feel like I've got the best job in the entire world. So whenever the government does something that's silly or ridiculous or really impacts a person's life, we want to try to get involved and push back against that. Someone's got to stand up for the individual against City Hall, or push back against the state capitol, or push back against bureaucrats. And that's my job. That's our mission. That's what we do, and we're free.
How do you get your funding?
Donations.
100%?
Yeah, and grants. But people care about our mission, and so they support us.
Do you have as an organization, is there a political bent there? Is it simply a respect for free markets, or just constitutional rights? Like, how would you characterize it? As any political leaning or not?
No political leaning. Our focus is, again, to push back against government interference. And we really care about individual liberty and individual rights. And so some people might want to try to paint us into a corner because we care about individual liberty and individual rights. But for us, it's not about politics. It's about defending constitutional rights and pushing back where possible.
I think if you talk to people kind of not in this super modern era, the last whatever couple of decades, you would find people on both sides of the ideological divide defending individual rights, and they can call them what they want: human rights, civil rights. Sometimes that gets wrapped up in a ball like the government should provide things for you and they're labeled rights. But I think there was a time when it was understood that you did not have to be politically right or left to respect the autonomy of the individual and that person's right, especially if you want to talk about a left-right divide. There was a time when, the people who are working in the gardens, the people who would want the right to sell their own honey, which is the topic I want to talk to you about today, would be on the left.
Yeah, that's what's so interesting. And you really did hit the nail on the head. It's been very interesting kind of seeing where things have ebbed and flowed over the decades and kind of where we are right now. And for us, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing, which is individual liberty, individual rights. And the politics will probably change every election cycle, but we don't really care about that. So we just keep doing what we're doing.
How did you, I think that in my observation, the lockdown here in California was a year and a half where my kids did not go to school during COVID. I think a lot of people, I'm sitting here right next to a huge pile of dried food. I think
Right.
a lot of people realized how vulnerable they were on the system, and how just a little bit of pre-planning, a little bit of education, a little bit of reaching back into our past that we all share in this country, we could have so much more independence and security. I call it like being independently healthy.
Right.
Like you can, it's just, I mean, a chicken can mean the difference between, or a couple of chickens can keep you from starving. Really, if the roads were locked down and everything, if there were really that level of isolation, which they could have imposed upon us because people were just shocked by it. And then I think a lot of people turn to thinking about how to have a little backup food growing out of their own soil. And I just wonder if you noticed that also, or how your endeavors were impacted by COVID, both like the topics that you deal with and your ability to actually fight during that time. Or did you just have to take a back seat at that time?
No, we definitely did not take a back seat. So we sued a local health officer who imposed what we thought was a very unreasonable and unconstitutional restriction on a bar owner and her bar. And so just a quick overview, what happened was the local health officer would, in our view, arbitrarily change the closing time without any authority under state law, change our client's closing time. It would go from midnight to 10 p.m. to 9 p.m. to 1 in the morning. In our view, that he did not have any authority to do that. And more importantly, our client had taken steps to make sure her patrons were safe. She had put up the plexiglass. She'd done all that kind of stuff. And so from her perspective and our perspective, it's like, hey, you got to give our client and others the opportunity to at least have procedural due process. Like, just give us a hearing.
Yes.
And if we're doing things the correct way, then let us open. And if you think that that particular bar isn't doing the right thing, well, then you can deal with that person. Don't do this one size fits all approach. It doesn't work. There's no scientific basis for it. And I get really fired up about this because it's like, you definitely need the ability to have a hearing in times of emergencies. So sometimes people say, oh, well, you can't have a hearing during an emergency. And it's like, well, that's the exact time when you need to be able to have that opportunity, because you don't just want the government coming in and making bad decisions and then the public and private citizens just throw their hands up there and say, well, like, there's nothing for me to be able to do. And that just doesn't make any sense.
A couple of things there. One is I have, there's someone I interview kind of regularly. His name is Anthony Raimondo. He's a little too hot to handle in his neighborhood after COVID because he was a lawyer, and he identified that it was in Fresno, California, that when they came in and shut down, that local government shut down bars and restaurants, the existing law required a hearing. That was not permitted without a hearing, and they had closed the courtrooms down. So, and all the government buildings. So no one had access to a hearing. And he, these little things, those of us, I actually went to law school, just not a practicing lawyer. And it would just be very difficult for me to navigate that. But someone like him, who is experienced and confident, he would just file whatever it was that they were supposed to file. And anybody who came to him, he did it for nothing, stayed open because they were just waiting for that hearing. And I guess the way the law was written, they could stay open until the hearing, which is, some of this crunchy granola stuff and people really taking government seriously in California. As a hardcore libertarian, I contribute absolutely nothing to the proper functioning of government. I don't even really think that government's legitimate half the time anymore, but out there, but I've noticed it in California, like some of these things that people put in place over the years by being very demanding did, like the public schools handled this with more of a respect for an individual's rights than the private schools my kids went to, I noticed. So that I thought was good, but I was just wondering, where are all the lawyers when you need them? There weren't a lot.
Yeah, no, that's true. And you really do kind of bring up a good point of where were all the lawyers. And it's also, there were lawyers who wanted to do things, but the case law was so bad and you just didn't really want to make things worse. So we were very careful about the cases we did, but we also weren't going to just say, oh, we'll wait till COVID is over before we do anything. Because, cities, well, in Kansas, there were a lot of local health officers, which is almost like a countywide position, they were doing some pretty crazy stuff. Like you could go to certain bars, but you couldn't dance on a dance floor.
Yeah, we had some of that.
It's like, come on.
Too.
But where's the peer-reviewed study on that?
Right. And I also felt another organization, another lawyer, Brian Festa, his goal is more formal like yours. And his argument is always, if these cases are going to be litigated, if these precedents are going to be set, we need to put our best foot forward when the opportunity arises, or you could really lock in some bad case law and not really have the opportunity to overturn it for a long time. So I worry, I get a little down the rabbit hole, or my listeners would think a lot down the rabbit hole, but I feel like there will be people who will fight the case half-heartedly, or maybe, try to tread lightly and then lose the case and set a bad precedent. I worry about that.
We were still dealing with Jacobson v. Massachusetts, which got issued in, I think it was 1905. So we're still at that case today.
Right. And it's not as bad as the things that were rested upon it since then. So, and I would just say, I am also a big fan of, and I think people don't understand it very well, but I think they get blinded by the outsized settlements. But I love the way tort law allows people to act with freedom and then know that they are going to be personally responsible for harm that they cause. And then you don't have to put, I guess what you do a lot of free speech work as well, I think, like a priori restraints or any of that. Like you can just tell people like, yes, I'm so far as to say, I think you can cry fire in a crowded theater and you can be held responsible for all the damage that you cause to the theater owner, to people who get trampled. You know what I mean? Who would do it?
Yeah, it's all about personal responsibility. And so that is going to be a component of our case dealing with Ellen Finnerty and her right to be able to garden and produce local honey as a home-based business. The city has a complete prohibition on home-based businesses that aren't conducted entirely within the dwelling unit, and all home-based businesses involving animal care of any type. And so what they have done is, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, so the case that we're talking about now is the case that caught my attention, Ellen Finnerty in Ottawa, Kansas. Is that correct?
That's right.
And she was hoping to, she works like a dog, all day at her day job, but she bought a house intentionally with a garden and with the intention of putting some beehives on there that will interact with the gardens. And she wanted to sell some produce. I wanted to sell the honey that she produced at the farmer's market. And there's a total prohibition. I noticed that Ottawa prohibition was not only on anything that's produced outside the four walls of your house or anything that is produced with animals. And you could maybe think there was a health and safety reason, but in that same ordinance, I noticed in the case that you filed, you can't sell antiques.
That's right.
So that blew that up for me. So so that's just the backstory. And you're defending her right. You're saying that law in Ottawa, not only violates her rights, which are justifiable based on tradition and personal responsibility, but also the Kansas Constitution.
Yeah, that's what makes this case a lot different, or potentially a lot different than cases filed around the country under the United States Constitution. So what we're doing is we filed solely under the Kansas Constitution. It's filed in state court. And what we're doing is we're saying that under Kansas Constitution, Section 1, the Life, Liberty, and Pursuit of Happiness Clause, the Kansas Constitution provides greater freedoms, greater rights, greater individual liberty than the United States Constitution. And there is precedent for it. There is history for it. The text is there. The writings are all there. And so what we're doing is we're saying, hey, you cannot have these complete prohibitions involving animal care, involving home-based businesses. You just cannot do it.
So my question is, just to clarify, I always wonder, I look at the federal Constitution and I don't necessarily, it seems to me that it restricts until the 14th Amendment came along and was thought to apply it to the states. It was really just restricting federal government activity. And the state constitution of Kansas isn't like that. It applies to the laws that the counties can pass.
So in Kansas, the way the Kansas Constitution works is if a city passes an ordinance or passes a rule or regulation, then the Kansas Constitution could govern. At the same time, though, in theory, the city ordinance could also violate the United States Constitution. And so we're blessed with two constitutions, the U.S. Constitution and the Kansas Constitution. But from our perspective, the way the Kansas Constitution was written and the different sections it has, and if you comb through the Kansas founders when they were discussing the Kansas Constitution, we firmly believe that Kansas provides greater freedoms than the U.S. Constitution.
It seemed like it on the face. I mean, I will include in the show notes on my website, monicasdeepdives.com, for this episode, your case filing. So it's like 27 pages, and it very clearly lays it out. It seems to violate the face of the Constitution of Kansas. I think it has some. It's not just. Is it just that first clause, that kind of general vague clause? I felt there were specifics.
So what we're doing is we're saying that Ellen has a right to earn an honest living, free from unreasonable government regulations. And our view is, and there's a lot of historical support for this, that is a fundamental, natural, and inalienable right. And so the Kansas Constitution protects the right to earn an honest living, which is like a lot of people will think or hear that phrase in the context of occupational licensing. And so take, for example, in Kansas, we actually had, and we sued over this, there was a law that said you had to get an occupational license to perform eyebrow threading. And to get that license, you had to go to an esthetician school for 1,000 hours. And sometimes those schools charge up to $15,000 before you could do a threading. And for anyone who doesn't know, threading, you just take a piece of cotton thread and you roll it over the eyebrow and it removes the eyebrow. So it's a way to kind of shape or groom the eyebrow. It's totally safe. All you got to do is just make sure your hands are washed. So in Kansas, you had to get that license and pay, upwards of $14,000, $15,000. And they weren't teaching threading in the school. So,
oh my gosh.
Yeah. So what's the point? Like, what is the justification for something like that? So we filed a lawsuit, same type of theory, that our clients had the right to earn an honest living, and the government can't arbitrarily come up with rules that prohibit somebody's occupation. They have a right to work, and that's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years in case law, in Magna Carta, and elsewhere. And so it's the same theory here for Ellen. Ellen isn't doing anything wrong. She's not doing anything dangerous. All she wants to do is make some side money to her backyard. And so she has two fundamental inalienable natural rights. One, like I said, the right to earn an honest living. And two, the right to use her own backyard in a peaceful and productive and benign manner. So as long as she's not harming anyone else, she should be allowed to do it. And the government can't tell her no for no good reason.
I love that you are pursuing this case, because I think it's important to assert and defend these rights, because they get encroached upon little by little until they're gone. And just accepting it almost stipulates that you feel that it's acceptable. And then you kind of, there's reliance built upon it. And I feel like you have to use it or lose it every step of the way.
Yeah, no, that's totally true. And I do think of it as like a death by 1,000 cuts. I mean, you have these individual liberties, you have these rights and freedoms, and then slowly, like you're saying, they just kind of go away. And then one day you wake up and you're like, oh my God, how did we get here? Like, yeah. Well, it happened over 40 or 50 or 60 years. And the reason we exist is because it doesn't make sense for Ellen, our client, to go pay a lawyer $500 an hour to sue the city to be able to sell a few gallons of honey a year. Like, it just, from a financial perspective, doesn't make any sense. And a lawyer's not going to do that. A private lawyer is not going to do that, because it wouldn't make sense to say, oh, I need a $50,000 retainer to do that. Like, it doesn't make any sense. But for us,
right.
That puts us in a perfect position to be able to do cases like this.
Yeah. So who do you think is behind? I mean, is the Ottawa legislative body that put this code in place, are they, or whatever regulatory body, do you think they're well-meaning? I mean, it's weird to throw antiques in there. And I just wonder who's kind of behind it. Like, is people are going to benefit? Who is selling honey at the farmer's market, if not people who grow grow bees in their backyard?
Right. Well, so I think probably what's happened is cities started getting the authority to exercise their police powers or use their police powers in the early 1900s. And then throughout that time, city planners started to kind of take advantage of their ability to do some types of regulation. And then they realized that incorrectly, but they believed that they shouldn't be having home-based businesses in their neighborhoods. And so they took this very restrictive view of how somebody should be living their life in their own home, which is very bizarre to me. But the city planners had this idea. And so then what they started doing is just started picking and choosing winners and losers. And a city planner says, I don't want somebody selling antiques from their house because maybe somebody will park the car up front and go in the house and buy an antique. And we can't have that. And so you just have some bureaucrat making that decision, in our view, for no good reason. There's absolutely no good reason why you would have something like that. And so that's how we end up with a case like ours. And I don't think that is unique in Kansas. I think there are a lot of cities in Kansas that have home-based business restrictions, and people just don't think about it, or people can't afford a lawyer. And so they just run their home-based business anyway, and they just do it underground.
And you think that, and your opinion in this case anyway, is that it just kind of organically emerged as people wanted to curate the neighborhood, not something a little bigger like, well, there's a very strong honey organization, beekeepers association that's making sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen. It sounds more like it's just a way to control the neighborhood, like an HOA would want to do it.
Yeah, but I do think that
with the force of government.
Right. I do think big businesses do co-opt governments all the time, and they use government to kind of squeeze out competitors. But I don't think that's really what happened here, because I don't think Kansas is big enough of a honey producing state.
Yes.
Yeah, to come in, and especially in the city,
Ottawa. Right. Yeah. So there's two more things I wanted to ask you. I don't want to take a lot of your time because I know you're busy and it's valuable, but I did want to. I noticed in your argument over and over again, it refers to tradition, history. At one point, something I was reading, it was a quote from Ben Franklin.
That's right.
I have an idea of, I could make an argument for why that's important, but I wonder if you could just articulate why that matters so much.
Yeah, so it matters for a couple of different reasons. One reason it matters is when we're talking about a fundamental right or a natural right. There's a lot of scholarship, there are a lot of court opinions out there that say, well, there has to be some historical basis for it. We don't want judges to just come up with a fundamental right in 2023 unless there's some support for it. And so that's why we've gone to great lengths to explain that this isn't something new. KJI just didn't come up with this a month ago. There is a lot of historical support for this. This isn't some weird esoteric theory. This has been around for a long time. And what is very cool is if you comb through the debates over the Kansas Constitution, they are talking about the Declaration of Independence and what it means. And they're talking about freedoms and individual liberties. And so that's why we have the Kansas Constitution, is to protect those things. And so what we're trying to do is explain in our court filings why that's so important. And the other reason is to explain to the public, beekeeping has been around for thousands of years. And people have been keeping bees safely for a long time. This isn't something that, that Ellen just came up with for the first time a year ago. And so that even makes my mind the government's regulations so ridiculous that they're trying to regulate. Actually, they're not even regulating, they're prohibiting an activity that has been here for thousands of years. I mean, come on. That to me, that's ridiculous.
I thought it was so, I'm going to say adorable.
I don't know if I've ever had any of my lawsuits described as adorable, but I'll take.
You're right. The lawsuit was adorable because it had in it, first of all, it was, really old texts and guidebooks and stuff on beekeeping, one like why the honeybees make good pets.
Yeah.
And then, how to build like how to start with a hive. And actually it was so effective. I thought it was very original that it made me feel totally comfortable with the ability of Ellen to safely raise bees in her backyard, and that it was natural and normal and would bring joy. And she references repeatedly the importance of her relationship with her daughter and how excited her daughter was to do this. And they would learn it together. They would, and what a wonderful lesson and experience to have to learn it on your own. It's good to have heirloom wisdom and to pass that down, but to also show your children, literally gives me goosebumps, to show your children that we can reclaim that heritage. We can reclaim our natural rights and abilities to live off the land, especially if you paid for the land. You don't even have to get into the, God gave us this land. She paid for the land and she's not encroaching on other people's rights. And if she does, she'll have to suffer the consequences of that. They will have, the right to sue her. So I found it very persuasive and very comforting in that way. But I also feel like the fact that courts still look back at the tradition, at history, it's recognizing the value of culture in a way that I think is almost like a bad word. Like you can't have any, culture is such a confusing concept right now. There's multiculturalism and which is depending on what it is, but culture and tradition and habits and things that we learn and are passed down, they have value or they wouldn't be passed down. And the fact that they are part of the culture means that we kind of know how to do it. We know how to use it. We know how to do it safely. Enough people know about it that if you're acting crazy, you have way too many bees, people will say, hey, that's, they're coming on my land. It's not supposed to be like that. There's real inherent value in culture and history and tradition and habits and what the community is familiar with that should, I would never be a good lawyer because I went to law school, but everything was black and white to me. And I also went to business school, I was much better at that. And I, right. and I couldn't, I just couldn't figure it out. Like I'd be absolutely terrible at it, which is why I think it's law, medicine, and the clergy are professions, like they're vocations that you have to be called to because you can understand those nuances. And I appreciate that this is, I'm persuaded by the argument in a kind of, an innate, instinctive way. And I feel like it's, if it's not persuasive, I'm going to be very disappointed if you don't win. So I want to know, what's the process from here on out?
Yeah. So first, I appreciate all of that. Thank you. We have served the city of Ottawa, and now it's up to them. The ball is in their court. They can try to move to dismiss our lawsuit. They can reach out and try to work on a compromise. They can do all sorts of different things. But now the ball is in their court. We have staked our claim, so to speak, and now it's up to them. We'll see what they do.
And when do you find out? When's the next step?
So the next step would be they have to answer the lawsuit, which is 21 days after we filed. It's coming up here in the next couple of weeks. They can move for an extension if they want, and then they're going to have to put something down on paper with the judge, with the court, and then we'll kind of take it from there. But we're prepared for really anything that they put forth.
I wanted to ask you, so please keep us posted on that and any other lawsuits that you want.
Yeah.
An opportunity like this to talk it out, put it on your website, whatever. I'm always there for you. You're welcome to ask for that. My pleasure. And then, but I did, for my listeners who I do worry for them because a lot of them are homesteaders. Many people, I should say, an increasing proportion of people who, have day jobs are doing things even in the city, growing things in the city. And then it seems to me a lot of them will take the next step and move outside the city and get more and more off the grid, get their chickens, collect their rainwater.
Right.
And I worry because I know how how much time and effort it takes to learn those skills, to tend animals and gardens and that. And I worry that that water rights will go the way of gun rights and just be a constant struggle to retain them. I'm talking about like rainwater, not even like how do you divide up water that runs through your land?
Right.
Like rainwater falls onto your land, and there are places I think here in California that say you cannot collect it. And then I've read a lot about with the threat, which I'm a suspect of the stated purpose, but that they were killing chickens. They were killing chickens because of COVID. And now they're saying because of avian flu. I mean, chickens, they just eat garbage and make like the perfect food. It's awesome. I mean, we should have chickens everywhere. So I worry about people, homesteaders and people like Ellen, like you were saying before, lawyers not going to really take that up. What do you have any advice that you can tell these people? Just go to city council meetings. Like, what should people do to try to assert their rights here? Defend them.
Yeah, it depends on the person's personality. And I say that because for some people, they don't really want to say anything. They're too uncomfortable. They don't feel like they can get up and say something. And so for them, maybe just writing a letter to the local newspaper, like for them, that might work. For others, it might be going in and talking at a city council meeting. For others, it's trying to sit down with the mayor. For other people, it's getting out and protesting. For some, it's filing their own lawsuit. And then for others, it's like aggressively trying to find a lawyer who would litigate that case up to, the state Supreme Court or the United States Supreme Court. And so I think it's really important that a person is kind of reflective and thinks about what they could do, maybe what's comfortable for them, maybe what they could do that's just a little bit uncomfortable for them, but still effective. But it really depends on their personality. Like, what I would be willing to do is probably far different than some of my friends. And so then my course of action is going to be different.
That's a great answer. And I do feel guilty because I just hate stuff like that. And I'm totally happy doing research, having conversations, disseminating that.
That's important.
Yeah. But I mean, I felt really disempowered, which is like probably not even a real word, but I was not happy with the fact that COVID things were happening and really people who were good at process were really needed. And there were just so few there fighting the good fight. So that's why I really respect your courage and your personality to be like that when you seem like a very affable person. I don't imagine it's a different story when you're in the middle of a fight.
I get fired up, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, you have the right on your side. And also, I guess, one thing I would say that it is important for people to stay educated because you really can't, I think, wait for the knock on the door, like where are your chickens?
Yeah. No, that's totally true. Like, do research, talk to people. I think that's really important. Like, talk to your neighbors, talk to people who have done it, who are contemplating doing it. All of that's really helpful. And then just, if you can, be an advocate for yourself. I think that's really important. And don't take the government's word for it. Like, sometimes they tell you stuff and it's wrong. And so, like, just because somebody who's a government official tells you something, well, that doesn't mean it's right. Like, come on, they put their, what's the phrase? They put their pants on one leg at a time. Like,
yes.
So
yes, do your own research, which
that's
now
right.
is like a dirty word. Isn't that funny? Have you seen that? It's like, there's a whole montage of newscasters and stuff making fun of people who do their own research.
Right. Yeah.
It's like it's intellectually shameful to do your own research. Well, legally, I would say, yeah, you're right. It's important to do that. So let me just wrap by saying that you are the Sam MacRoberts, the General Counsel and Litigation Director for the Kansas Justice Institute. And how do people help support you? Or is there a network of similar ones around the country? Or are you guys a standalone thing and you fight your fight?
Yeah, so you can find us at kansasjusticeinstitute.org. It's all, spelled out, kansasjusticeinstitute.org. We're part of Kansas Policy Institute, which is a think tank. And there are other free law firms around the country who do similar work like we do in their respective states. So there's a Mississippi Justice Institute, They do similar type things down there. But we are focused in Kansas and doing our work here.
Well, it's great. I mean, that case about the bees caught my eye because I just bought a house in LA that has bees in the backyard, and the guy in repayment for allowing the bees on the land, he gives or says he's going to, and has a little bit already given us honey. And I was wondering about that. I was like, hey, is that barter? Does that count? Is that could Ellen barter with her neighbors if they have chicken eggs? I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's not enough. I mean, she has to be able to earn an honest living when use the fruits of her own land. Why discourage using the fruits of the land? It's in the interest of the local community to be able to do that.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And it was so enjoyable to hear your insights from a position of experience and I would say integrity. So thank you very much, Sam MacRoberts. Thank you all for listening. This is Monica Perez on Deep Dive.